Yoshitaka Amano is the artist that Squaresoft hired to make Final Fantasy compete against Akira Toriyama's Dragon Quest art. Amano is the creative mind behind the logo designs and many of the character concept art of the series. Of course, he did way more than that. However, the question is what makes his art so unique, stylistic, and truly him? Are it the pale skin tones, interesting silhouettes, or the blonde hair? The truth is, Amano's art style is in fact a mystery. When we break down and analyze Yoshitaka Amano's artworks, objectively there's no particular detail nor element that makes his style his. It's as if the illustration as a whole serves as a window to his mind's eye, revealing his artistic vision. And I agree that this holds true for all artists. However, most of them do have these reoccurring stylistic elements in them. But Amano likes to mix things up way more often than you might think. To quote the man himself, I see a lot of artists get trapped into one style. I try to free myself out of it and move into new things. I don't even know what the Amano style is. With that said, I think we can all agree that we can easily recognize his works. So there should be some elements we can pinpoint as his artist's signature. And to get a gist on some of his tropes, we will mainly look at his character art. While some of his illustrations are complex, he often simplifies the face to make it the focal point. And when we zoom in, Amano tends to draw the eyes rather sharp and elongated. Furthermore, he draws the basic fundamentals in a somewhat semi-realistic way, adding dark lower eyelids and irises. Most of the time the eyebrows are subtle, especially compared to the expressive eye contour. Moreover, here and there Amano adds tear ducts and whimpers to emphasize them even more. One thing I noticed is that Amano draws the nose with a downwards pointing tip, which is actually the opposite of what many manga and anime styles do. Another element that might be seen as typical Amano is how he draws the mouth. It's rather dark and small. An unmistakable characteristic of Amano's characters is his tendency to favor a pale white skin tone. However, there are enough examples where he does add more substance. In addition, Amano draws the hair with a lot of detail. To clarify, he doesn't draw the typical manga and anime hair chunks, more like these elongated individual strands. However, he does so in such a balanced way that it sums up the total of its parts, making it flow well, which to me is not distracting and fits into his character design. Details like these are one of his key elements in his illustrations. But before I dive into that aspect, I want to address the clothes first. Amano favors somewhat lavish clothing designs, full of small details and fancy prints, prioritizing the aesthetic appeal over practicality. We can see this in various trinkets and assets, as well as in its weapon designs. When we talk about creating and designing characters, the conventional rule is to only incorporate elements that contribute to the character's personality or have some sort of practical application. And except for pre-made characters by other artists, Amano disregards this rule, as nearly all his characters show these intricate designs. One thing though, although he noted that he doesn't really stick his design to certain cultures. In one interview, he did note that he gets inspired by Greek, Roman, Celtic and Japanese art. When we look at Amano's overall works, there is no surprise to say that he loves details. And one aspect to make that possible is because of his line art. He loves to use these thin, wavy, elongated strokes. Amano doesn't shy away from experimenting with character posture and silhouette, which could be defined as a somewhat wispy style. One could also say this makes the entirety of his art very stylistic. Talking about tools, Amano enjoys working with all kinds of traditional media such as watercolor, acrylic and ink pens. Nevertheless, he does not shy away from experimenting with things like running ink, carving wood and copper plates. His work is also inspired by ukiyo-e, which are these old monochrome Japanese scroll and wall paintings. In an interview he said, for inspiration he also tries to observe the world around him. No matter what object, he likes to get something useful out of it to translate into his art. Furthermore, he loves Western comics and painters. He emphasized that the art and animation of the West, including Disney, had great influence on him growing as an artist. Because Amano experiments with so many tools, his application of colors is no different. First off, most of his art pieces are dominated by one color, such as the primary colors, red, blue and yellow. This also accounts for secondary colors. He does this by breaking them up and dividing them across the character or background. Now, he is excellent at this, and this is not an understatement. However, I have to say, not all his art is as effective. Some are way too busy for my tastes. But again, there are way more examples where he shows how to balance and to harmonize the colors. To emphasize, I think the following art piece is one of his best. The Warrior of Light from Final Fantasy. In this image he basically uses the whole color wheel. However, he has this nice balance of the primaries, red, yellow and blue. Actually, to do this effectively is no easy feat in character art, because it's easy to screw up the color harmony with each other, all screaming to be the most dominant. However, Amano slightly changes the tones of the watercolors, cleverly pushing their volume and placement so that the character silhouette in the art piece is still easily readable. To simplify, he uses these big chunks of light and dark values to emphasize the silhouette. Then he adds details by changing the color tones slightly, which not only creates depth, but moves our eyes towards the focal point. This is an interplay between simplified and detailed art. While I won't explain it now, the basic gist is, professionals like Amano likes to control the order flow of the objects. We as the observer are to follow first, second and third. Again, when we look closer, he has so many details and simplified forms in his art. They coexist well with each other to make the entirety to be interesting without making your mind too busy at all. To take it into an opposite direction, when Amano does something different entirely, an art piece that does not have a coherent structure, it starts to become rather busy. At least for me, an art piece like this is way too much. That said, everyone sees things different. Some people are overview orientated while others are more detail orientated. We as artists need to address both these aspects to seek equilibrium, which I think Amano has many excellent examples of. And to take a quick look back at the Warrior of Light. The focal point is the face, then the silhouette, and when we explore everything around him, we ultimately start to see this weird guy. Which to me says it's the perfect background object that contributes to the total aesthetic. However, it's not only the color that makes Amano's art pop. It's the way he uses white. I think some of his best art pieces are evident of this. Especially his Final Fantasy VI cover. Put it amongst other SNES box art and you can tell there's a museum art piece among them. Also, fun note, he's the first artist to launch a VR museum, which is basically a three-dimensional art tour of his works. Pretty cool that he did this as his 17th year anniversary, and shows he loves to pioneer like a true artist. So what about his character designs? Well, he's great at creating these more mature characters. I think his excessive creativity also makes most characters unique, which made him a great choice for a large character cast as seen in Final Fantasy VI. And while I personally don't have a strong opinion on his characters, I think he does favor serious characters and expressions. But he has many examples of light-hearted characters as well. Like I've mentioned before, Amano does have a preference for white and blonde-haired characters. Aside from him being a character artist, he's also a monster designer. And honestly, some of his works are excellent. He really can show the fierceness in these creatures. He has a great sense of mystique and doesn't shy from very playful art pieces. And even some that makes us question our very existence of life. And while I do prefer this chocobo over this one, I have to say Amano is a man of fantasy, with a true artist spirit that effectively opened his mind for us to explore. Leave your own world to experience others is one of his mantras. He said that he has loved drawing since childhood and still enjoys it just as much. Amano is one of those few artists who can draw on paper what he sees in his mind's eye. We all know how hard that is. This is one of his great gifts, which not only makes him efficient, but free as well. He noted that after his skills matured, he didn't stress to draw back to back for big deadlines. And that's also what he emphasized. That he is a freelancer, truly feels free drawing fantasy despite whatever the IP he's working on. In other words, he can be himself, and his biggest takeaway is, don't listen to others, listen to yourself, do what you believe in. Words we all should explore for ourselves in our own journey. I'm light novel author GP Vugs. And you know, as a kid playing Final Fantasy VI, I initially struggled to appreciate Yoshitaka Amano's art style. However, as I explored his works across IPs like Garcia, Front Mission, and Vampire Hunter D, in my opinion his art style is unique, interesting and definitely masterful.